So good afternoon. This is a continuation of the pension work group. This is the Vermont State Teachers breakout session. Today is the 1st of December, and our task today is to simply and very difficultly come up with suggestions that we would like the actuaries to model. That's all. We're not going to make any decisions today as far as what we're going to do or what we're not going to do. We are simply going to make recommendations, and I would ask Chris to, I don't think we want to make 10 recommendations, but maybe is something that the actuaries can handle and actually get back to us in a timely enough manner so that we can look at them and digest them and decide what we want to do. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's very true. The only thing I would add is, time is definitely going to be an important factor for our consideration. So to the extent we can build off of sort of questions we've already asked them to model, or that they've already modeled in other, iterations of analysis, is going to help us. It will save time, it will save money. If we are really kind of reinventing the wheel and starting all new from something that is really complicated to put a model together for that they haven't done yet and may not yield, the juice may not be worth the squeeze, that is going to complicate our efforts. So the extent to which we can sort of build on what's already been done at some point, or sort of make changes to that, would probably be a little easier for me.
Okay. So one of the things that was pointed out correctly, and I think it was Eric that pointed out in there, there's really 4 boxes that we're considering options out of, or a combination of options out of. And really the option that we have here in front of us, because they've already talked about the revenue piece, is the benefits piece. And I will tell you from my own piece, I am retired military. I do receive a pension. I understand what it means. So I've got that. Even the military has changed their pension. They've gone to a portable pension now. It's a DC-DB hybrid that allows soldiers who don't do 20 years to bring it with them. Because prior to that, a soldier that served less than 20 years, when they left, there wasn't a pension. So this was quite a major change on the part of the military to do something that would actually look at all of the soldiers instead of just the soldiers that served 20. So what I did is realizing that I might be put on this group, I just came up with and again, we're just asking for ideas to have the actuary price it. We're not saying we want to do it yet, or we don't want to do it. We just want to see what it's going to cost. The other thing I want to say is this: I'm not a fan of cutting benefits. In other words, so let's say your pension is $48,000. No, we're going to cap pensions at $36,000. I'm not a fan of doing something like that. Now, the two things that I thought of, one is risk sharing, the other one is non-risk sharing. They look remarkably similar to what the Vermont State employees have put out there. And this is just me getting the conversation started. I tend to do that in just about every forum that I'm in. I'll throw something out there first. So
can I ask one clarifying
question
for you? When I just want to make sure I'm remembering the 4 boxes. So the 4 boxes that I heard Eric say were one-time funds, ongoing revenue, and then I heard contributions and benefits, and those to me are both on the table here. You said benefits, but I think we're talking about both, right?
It could be both, yes, could be both. Although I'm looking at the benefits here, and I'm looking at the growth of benefits is where I'm going here. Okay. So, and you'll see that one because it's just two concepts put together in each situation, and it looks just like on the Vermont State employee side. The first one is a COLA. The amount of your retirement would be COLA eligible up to $24,000, and above that it is not COLA eligible, combined with a wait time of 36 months before you could earn a COLA after retirement. So again, you would have let's say your retirement was $48,000 a year. The first $24,000 would be eligible for a COLA. The second $24,000 would not. That would be the first piece of it. And then the second piece is you would wait for 36 months prior to receiving a COLA after retirement. Yes.
To clarify, with the CPI on that COLA threshold, you're suggesting up to 24,000 be 50% or 100%?
So there's no COLA that COLA, gotcha, the $24,000, we get rid of the 50% COLA, it goes to just the COLA.
So it goes to 100% of
It goes to
CPI.
100% of the
Okay.
CPI.
With a floor of 1 and max of 5.
I didn't include that, we can, but I did not include that. What I've done here is I'm trying to really narrow what I'm asking the actuaries to look at, because again, I don't know how much time we have. You know, if we give them a fairly hefty lift, I don't know how long it's going to take to get it back.
So can I try summarizing this to make sure I'm understanding correctly? So the easiest part to explain is having to wait 36 months to receive COLA.
Yep.
I know some Group C members already have to wait 12 months. I believe Group C2 get a write-off. They don't have to wait.
I thought the 12 applied to every.
12 also. We didn't hear back from Mike Clausen on that.
He didn't say I was wrong. He did look at the statute and, you know, this is not my doing because I don't write the laws, but when this was written like 20 years ago, it is like so vaguely worded. But the practices I understand it is the 12 months kicks in for everybody.
Okay, because it's not listed.
It's not in the chart, no, because I had to look at it too, yeah.
Can we maybe just 100% follow up with Michael Clausen on it, just
Just grab one today.
all right, I'll check in with him just to make sure. All right,
So that's,
Say again, 12,
so
what was the,
you have to wait 12 months prior to
Right, but-
retirement, prior to getting the COLA.
you're saying right now, everybody does.
well, what's unclear is when you look at the VSTRS group plan comparison chart.
Yeah, that's,
It doesn't, it lists it for Group A and Group C number 1, or it does not say that for Group C, Group number.
Yeah, and I don't think the statute made a differentiation between C1 and C2 on that.
So I just wanted to make sure that I'm 100% clear on that. So that's the first.
All I'm trying to do here is also one of the things I'm trying to do is just a little more standardization between the two
Yeah.
sides where we can. Because it's very, and you're seeing a part of the confusion right now, and that's just within VSTRS.
So, okay, so I'm gonna keep summarizing. So everybody would go to 36 months for receiving COLA.
Correct.
Then the more complex, I guess, to explain is the piece that there is a $24,000 threshold. Any pension benefit beyond that receives 0 COLA.
Correct.
Every dollar from dollar number 1 to 20,000 would receive
24,000.
24,000, thank you, would receive 100% CPI,
Correct.
which is different than what we have right now with 50% CPI.
Correct.
And that's not necessarily having a floor of 1% or a ceiling of 5%.
Correct. Correct. And then the second one is a risk sharing. It's similar, but it's a risk sharing piece.
If you're gonna ask just a clarifying question on the first
Yep.
one. So would the 24,000 stay stagnant or would it?
It would stay stagnant, but you're going to hear differently in this next.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry, one thing I also just want to point out is so the average benefit that's paid out in retirement right now is about $24,000 to the whole universe of people, regardless of what year they retired. If you raise it from 50% of CPI to 100% of CPI, that is going to be a benefit enhancement for many, many people, and a very large percentage is going to see that benefit enhancement. So if you want to find something that is going to result in actuarial gains, there's going to have to be corresponding offsets to offset the higher cost of that higher COLA.
and the offset right now is the 36-month wait.
Yeah, and we should go back and see just how much of an offset that is. When you look at the individual.
And VSTRS and VSTRS are different in that way.
Yeah, we did not cost, I don't believe we costed that out for the state or for the.
No, not the
teachers.
drivers. We just-
No, we did not.
Just to give you a sort of an order of magnitude for the state system, which has a little bit, you know, it's a different membership, but it's a little bit smaller. That in isolation, that 36-month delay lowers their ADAC by 6.3 and unfunded liability by 42.
And that was the 36-month, you said?
Yes. That's what he said.
6.3 in FY23, and then it continues to grow.
What's the 42?
Yeah, it would keep pace with.
What was the 42? 6
Oh, the
point,
unfunded liability is 42.
so it lowers the ADEC 6.3 annually plus keeping pace, and then it lowers the unfunded liability 42 annually?
42. No, it'd be
No,
42 from the current, from the FY20 valuation. The 42 million less dollars we have to make up for between now and 2038.
Okay, oh, that's the truth. That was the cumulative versus the unyeared bracket.
Yeah, and again, that's
you know, I'm extrapolating here back at the envelope, just
Right.
based on what was costed out for the other system, but I think you would expect that this would move the needle in like high single digits, not like well into double digits. You know, it's probably gonna be somewhere between, you know, 6 and 10.
Yes, and what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to do, you know, give a little, get a little here, and I'm not trying to force it all into one side or the other. Realizing that we do have an issue that we need to deal with. The second, and by the way, I put these together over lunch. I mean, I literally, I ate my lunches. I take 5 minutes, Mike, to eat lunch, and I know you know what that means. And came down and sat down and just came up with a couple of ideas, again, liking to be similar between the two groups and working from there. So this next idea is all about risk sharing, and it's very similar to what I just said, except there are definitely differences. First of all, wait time, 24 months. Secondly, the COLA, $24,000. And you know, that's what the cap is, adjustable for the CPI annually. Above that, no COLA. Third, risk sharing. That,
1 second, Peter.
Yes.
I'm just trying to make.
okay, so again, wait time is 24 months. The COLA would be eligible for the first $24,000 of your retirement. Anything above that is not eligible, and that first $24,000 is CPI adjusted annually.
And 100%.
Correct.
Okay, I wondered that too.
And then the risk sharing piece here is that if this continues, as long as we have a funded ratio of less than 80%, and or the return for the year is less than 7%.
So this would continue until,
And until it's 100% funded. I mean, everything is based on 100% funded, because once we get there, different decisions are made that are beyond the scope of just the.
Okay, what did I hear you say? 80?
Yeah, you said.
So as long as, this is what you also heard, the DPIC chair talk about. Yeah, Tom DeLonca. He said he would be very happy if we got into the 80s on the funding ratio. So the risk sharing is based on, as long as the funded status of as long as the fund is 80% or below 80%, then the catch-up things here are apply, and then above that they can go away.
So explain what the risk share would look like.
So I really haven't gotten to that point.
Okay. We get to create.
You know, I mean, this was me reading through this packet again, and then putting together some ideas. So that's kind of something that we would need to flesh out here.
And I actually feel, Peter, like, I mean, just, this is all an if, again.
It is all in.
Before I
This
even
is,
speak.
you know, we're deciding nothing other than
Yep.
asking somebody to do some work for us.
So I feel like the changes to the system in its entirety, the changes to the retirement system in its entirety needs to be, if we go over 80% and we're getting over 7%, I don't want the COLA to only apply to 24K. I don't want the
Sure.
system to,
Yep.
you know, to be making money off the backs of state employees.
That's a good way of looking at risk sharing, and I would agree with that.
So you would be willing to see all of this, including the 24-month wait time, the 24K, only 24 disappear if it
Yes.
got healthy?
Go back to the way that it sits right now. Right.
Or go to whatever we determine is the best way, whether it's a
Yeah,
more progressive structure
Like
or.
this, one of the things that you're going to
100%
see,
CPI.
yeah, you're going to see a pension group form from this, and that pension group will probably meet every 3 months or so as part of the legislature, just to track what's going on as a result of our efforts. Such that if we see trends that are actually tracking what we put forward, then things are going well. And if not, then this group will probably, I can't say for sure, probably be reconvened to tweak a few things.
And so what does that?
So, pardon?
Is the pension group all legislators?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
We will probably talk about that in the future, but I believe it was part of the bill that passed. Yeah.
Maybe talk about JPOC or the Joint Public Pension Oversight Committee, which hasn't been formed.
Hasn't been formed.
I think the intent there was you have a small group of legislators that
watch.
you know, a gazillion issues go through GovOps and through appropriations, but you have a small group of people who really focus on it. And I think what President Fagan's alluding to is sometimes referred to as this concept of sort of shared risk, shared gain, where, you know, whenever a certain guardrails kick in, when the fund gets below some metric of pension health, and then when the fund exceeds that metric of pension health, those guardrails get relaxed a little bit.
Yep.
So then that's where the gain comes in.
Well, and I think it would, I mean, I think at the crossroads where we are, it behooves us to think about, what was the last thing you said about, like, if it's doing well, you use more, whatever words, I can't think of the word, better words. Making that the best it could be, not necessarily what it is, because what it is may not be the best it could be.
Correct. What I would envision at that point in time would be, let's go to a pension that doesn't make the hole any deeper. I've used that term several times. In other words, that part of our problem right now is that we still cannot define if we are at the bottom of the hole. Are we still digging in? We don't know for sure until we get a couple of years worth of data to see if the experience study that caused this change is going to tell us the hole is as deep as it's going to get. We're now starting to climb out of it. We can't say that yet.
And that big investment return we got last year, in a way, isn't real, if you will, for a couple more years in the actuarial math. So, excuse me, we had an awesome year last year. We're not going to exceed, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but I highly doubt we will exceed that rate this coming year. So how much of that gain can we keep in the math in the next few years? I think it's going to be critical too.
So the point that I want to make is this: the risk sharing piece will need to be adjusted at a time when they can actually figure out what the pensions ought to look like. And we're not, other than us saying, upon the pension getting in the 85 percentile or 80% range, they should be relooked at to determine what they should look like going forward at that point in time. Because we can't say it right now, because we don't know if what we're putting in place is actually going to work.
There could even, whatever you think about, there could also be caveat language where I think NASDAQ said maybe in South Dakota where they had some contingency language in where they would do a COLA as long as doing so doesn't drop the fund
Right.
below some ratio.
Yep.
So you could even think through, like, if you get at that point when you're 80.1% funded, you know, if doing the normal COLA, the shared gain thing kicks in, is that going to drop you down below, or do you do it to the extent to which it doesn't drop the fund below? Because you're going to think of the transition periods like that a little bit.
Andrew.
So I think the other part I heard you say is also that the fund has to achieve 7% or more. So let's say it hits 85% funding, but the return is 6%, it doesn't go away that year.
So I think, and I hadn't really fleshed out what the risk sharing was. I got some news from my wife and I had to call and talk to her for 15 minutes. So that took a chunk out of my lunch. Risk sharing is not, you know, wait 24 months in a COLA that's adjustable on 24. Risk sharing would be the COLA is 1 or 2% if it doesn't reach a 7% rate of return. And if it does reach the 7% rate of return, then you go to the normal COLA on the first 24,000.
I mean, I think it might be interesting. I think we'd have to delineate that a little more because you don't want to have an on again, off again year. You don't want to have something like that. Like, I think a combination of the 7% and the 80K, like there's some nuances to work in there.
Absolutely.
Have it be smooth. So
Yeah,
hopefully it's like, if we were doing this scenario, you know, there's not COLA and then there is, and you can count on it pretty, you know.
Could we do, Chris, the actuarially smooth concept in regards to a COLA here? You just said smooth and it caused me to think.
I think they can model whatever you want them to model. So I think, you know, one thing that I always kind of thought about too about this is one option could be, you know, right now we look at what happens to the CPI on a fiscal year basis. And then we do 1 year worth of COLA calculation based on that 1 year. Would it be smoother or more advantageous to do a multi-year average and say, you know what, we're going to average the CPI over the last 2-3 years, whatever that was determines the COLA for 1 year. And then the next year you repeat the calculation with a different set of 2 or 3 years that are averaged in. that could be sort of a way that gets, I think, to your intent of coming up with something that's a little bit smoother from year to year, because you can have that really crazy volatility from year to year in your investment performance and everything else.
That's actually a good idea. You do a 3-year smooth on the CPI and then base the current year on that result. And then the next year, you have a new set of 3 years for that 1 year. It's still going to be not be the same on an ongoing basis, but it'll take out the volatility of a CPI.
Right, it might take something like one bad year out of, shaking
Sure,
everything down.
Sure.
Boy, I talk with my hands a lot when I.
So do I. So you're right there with right there with I've actually hit people before when I'm talking.
That also eliminates if the return is 6.9.
Right, exactly.
So
Hey, Molly, can I ask a question? Molly, you said something in the other room about the 50% was what the teachers got for the trade-off of getting something more advantageous. What was, do you remember that, what the more advantageous?
Well, I don't even know exactly what was tit and what was tat, tit for tat, but what I think about holistically is, so teachers have a lower percentage, a lower contribution rate than most state employees, or maybe all state employees, but we only get 50% of the CPI. We have a rule of 90, they have a rule of 87, which is advantageous for them. So my guess is that at some point historically, state employees were sort of purchasing some of these benefits, like we can retire a little earlier. Or here's another really big example, actually, given our current state of health insurance expense. State employees from retirement onward get full health insurance for their families, whereas teachers in 2014 or 2010, it was negotiated that it didn't have to be just an individual teacher, it could be the teacher and their spouse.
Right.
But teachers don't have the option for family insurance.
And you have to attain 20 years, I think.
And yeah, you have to have a big chunk of work time. I think you're right, it's 20 years.
One of the other trade-offs that happened around that was there was something in place where the benefit multiplier after you have 20 years of service is higher. So every year, year 21 is worth 2%.
Yeah,
And
it was 1.667.
exactly. So like once you have 20 years, the future years of service are worth more, for lack of a better word. And the max benefit cap went, I think, from 50 to 60%. So if you're like a state employee group F member who, is under rule of 87, you need to work 36 years in order to hit your 60% of AFC. And a teacher who's under the rule of 90 has to work, I think it's like 33 and a third years to hit their max of 60%. So the two systems are not perfectly analogous, and I'm not sure they ever were. I don't know.
And then one is 60%, one's 50% for average final contribution generally.
I think it depends on the date of hire.
But
Yeah.
there's 100% in one of the state employees.
State plan.
Within-
Yeah.
within
judges.
Those are the guys that do.
But you'd have to have 30 years of service as a judge in order to get that. And the last time I looked, like most judges don't have that kind of seniority. I mean,
it's appointed at age 50, so.
But there's so many differences, between the two systems, but also within both systems have differences within themselves as well.
Yes.
So my point was just, it's very, very complicated. You can't just say, why are state employees paying 8.5%, teachers are only paying 6%? It's like, okay, well, they have family health insurance and we don't, or we have this and they don't. And, it's very complicated.
So just to restate here, everyone heard, and again, these are just so that the actuary can do its job and provide us information as to what this means. Doesn't mean we're going to enact or not enact anything. So the first one was really straightforward. The COLA at 24K, above that it doesn't wait 36 months. And then the second one was based on risk sharing, which based upon the conversation that just went around the table, I think I can finish the concept here. I just want to make sure that this is what I heard. So the risk sharing will actually drop the wait time down to 24 months because we're sharing risk. And the 24,000 of COLA is adjusted every year for the CPI. And then the risk sharing piece is we'll use a 3-year CPI average. And if that is not, help me here, if that CPI
I mean, do you want to, so if the,
This is the danger of thinking out loud on the fly.
yeah, so if you're looking at CPI, I mean, do you want to base the year's COLA based on the 3-year average of the CPI? Or do you, because that could be a different.
Yes.
And that's a different conversation than the investment performance.
Yes, well, that's if the investment does not reach 7% or greater. Again, I'm thinking off the top of my head here. I'm trying to.
So would the
give a little
3-year
bit-
average only apply if we fall short of the investment return?
Correct. Is that going to be too complicated for them?
That's gonna be pretty complicated. Well, I think there's going to be, I think, a lot of uncertainty in the analysis, because we don't know when we're gonna miss. So, they can adjust their assumption date and assume that, we'll miss 50% of the time or whatever.
Right.
But at the end of the day, that may or may not be true.
Okay, so we'll have to think of a different trigger here for this. Again, my risk sharing here is once it reaches a funded status of 80%, and then we go back to something that's more normal going forward, but that'll have to be determined at that time, what more normal looks like as far as the pension. In other words, we reduce some of the constriction on the pension that we are proposing here. And or it meets or exceeds on an annual basis of 7%, that can cause a couple of pieces within the pension to not be enacted that year. Like for instance, there's, what pension is it that if it doesn't meet 7%, the COLA is 1%?
That was the group, VSERS Group C asked that to be called.
Okay. Gotcha.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm just thinking about the 80% and then also the rate of return of 7%.
Yeah.
And I almost feel like we're double booking something that doesn't need to be double booked. Booked isn't quite the right term, but if we just kept that 80% funded ratio piece, then say we're at 83%. And yeah, there's a 6.2% yield year, but it's still, the funding ratio is still above 80%. Why do we need to look at both? Why not just keep that one funded ratio? I mean, the funded ratio seems to be the critical thing. The only reason the rate of return is because the funded ratio right now is so challenged.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
Does that make sense?
Again, this is part of the problem when you're thinking out loud,
Right.
you know? So it would be like trying to do a math problem you've never done before on the blackboard while in front of a group of kids. You would prefer to do the math problem before you did it in front of a group of kids.
I would, it just happens the way it happens, yep.
So, I'm right here doing this right now.
Kids is an awesome model.
It's a really good idea because it tells kids you don't have to be perfect.
And dealing with how
Just keep trying.
modeling how you deal with that emotionally and.
Just keep trying. So let's say we get rid of the 7% thing on the risk sharing. And again, I was only doing that because I'd read it in the what you call it.
Yeah, no, when you first said it, I was hearing it as two separate things, and the more I thought about it, I was like, what, that's kind of.
No, thank you, Molly.
Yeah.
That's good. So we got, and I'm using 80%, not 85% that Tom Galanga did, because you are willing to do some risk sharing here. Okay, so let's get 80%, and that will be one hell of an accomplishment. What can we suggest as far as COLA or other options that would be appropriate, such that once you ongoing, and then when you hit 80%, it reverts back to whatever normal will look like at that point in time.
Whatever some committee determines is the new normal.
Well, at that point in time, it would be a group of you folks and a group of probably legislators working together to figure out, okay, the one thing that will occur is that financial system will change going forward. And so what the pension looks like today and what it will look like in 20 years may well be very different. I'm just using 20 years as a number.
Yeah, and one thing just to keep in mind is, I don't expect, if we ask them to say, hey, what would happen if we do the COLA on a 3-year average instead of a 1-year? I don't expect that's going to move the needle very much in their modeling, because they're assuming that we're going to hit sort of one rate year to year. So I'm not sure it's going to change that as much as it might mitigate how far our experience might deviate from that assumption from year to year. I think the one thing that we should all keep in mind is
if we do anything, I'm using the royal we, all of us here. If you do anything that involves increasing the current calculation from 50% of CPI to 100% of CPI, it is going to offset an awful lot of the gain you can get from other changes. So we can sit here and think about delaying things for periods of time or whatever and creating tiers. But if you do that 50 to 100% as part of it, it's going to really offset a lot of the potential.
So I have a suggestion, and then Molly, I'll follow up with you. What if we leave the 50% of CPI in place until we reach 80% as a risk sharing, and then it goes to full CPI?
So what I was gonna say is that highlights that we've been risk sharing. And
Yes, I
so
agree.
if you keep it at 50%, that is risk sharing.
Yep.
So what does that mean about your plus some kind of risk share?
Well, what I'm saying though
That
is
could
that
be
upon
that.
reaching 80%, you go to full CPI. And that could be in statute. It may not, the pension itself may look a bit different, you know, this or that, but CPI or COLA is a COLA. And right now you're accepting a 50% COLA because of the CPI.
Yeah, or you could also say, if you set that trigger at 80% funded or whatever, you could say, and I'm spitballing here, but you could put some contingency language in that says, to the extent that doing so would not lower it below 80%, the CPI gets increased from, the current 50%, or the COLA from the current 50% to 100%. So like, what if going from 50 to 100 dropped you from 81 to 78 or something? Well, maybe they need to think about, this year, what can we afford to increase it by to make sure we stay above 8? So maybe it goes to 62% or something. But like, this goes to, that's why I said, this isn't necessary. This is a little more than risk sharing. I can kind of say this is shared risk, shared gain. Because if people are making the near-term sacrifice to improve the funded ratio, and then when the system gets up to that point, then the gain, the short-term sacrifice that was made then goes away, or the benefit is somehow otherwise enhanced, that it kind of fits into that theme.
And
Would this exempt people within 5 years of retirement?
we could have them look at it. I mean, certainly on the employee side, there was a larger a dent to the savings because of that than I had anticipated. But if you would like to look at it, I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think that the real question, there's a big difference in the numbers, whether you exempt people that were within 5 years or not. I think a real question that is up to you all to sort of think through is, are these the kind of changes that would encourage behavior that we don't want to encourage? So, are these going to be so significant that somebody is going to retire at a different age than they otherwise would? And what are the ramifications of that? I mean, I think that the extent to which you change the value of future benefits influences that question. It's not everything is going to encourage behavior. It really depends on what do you all think, from your members' hats, like through what lens would people view changes influencing their behavior, or is it so sufficient or perceived as detrimental that somebody would leave the profession sooner than they otherwise?
And I'm going to, quick comments are fine, but I'm going to say that's something to be brought home and to be thought about, to be discussed over and brought back to the group as a whole at some point in time in the future, because what we're trying to do here is figure out two, or I can put out two, maybe we can come up with a third. I'm thinking, I don't know if we want to do four, but maybe we can come up with a third, and such that we could then offer it to the whole group and get it out to the actuaries by the end of the day, so that they can start compiling it. Yes.
And mine isn't a personal response to that. I'm noticing that if COLA, the group to notice that if COLA is at 50% and only applicable to the 24,000, then that's a significant cut from what teachers are currently having. I think that's part of the plan, right? But just to know that, some teachers are above 24, or administrators are above or significantly above 24,000. And so that's a pretty significant change and may affect behavior.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a look at this data.
Yeah, how many numbers are above 24?
Yeah, let's take a look here. I'm looking at so this is the FY20 val that is in front of me. The 21, I think, is in the other folder, but let's just sort of give you a ballpark. Service pensioners, okay.
It's the annual allowance number you're looking at, Chris, to determine if they're
Yeah.
our allowance level.
Yeah, so the average across all groups
In boosters.
of Easters was $22,000.50 last year. The average for people who had 25 to 29 years of service was 27,394. And you start getting into $30,000 benefits when you're looking at folks who have more than 30 years of service.
And I would say that probably retirees in the 20 and beyond years, upcoming retirees starting now, like salaries are higher. So probably, you're looking at a group of people who might be 80 years old too.
Yeah, I am. And this is the kind of group this is the kind of thing that, however you want to do things, especially if you don't increase the threshold, the 24,000 or whatever, for a period of time, the gains will increase over time just because of upward salary pressure. Somebody retiring, when all else is equal, somebody retiring today is going to have a better benefit than somebody who retired 5 years ago because they'll just have a different salary history.
AFC is higher.
Exactly.
And so that's what I mean, like people who are looking at, should I retire this year? If this change, or should I retire now or in the next however many years, like might affect their behavior because it's a pretty significant cut.
Well, and it's also, if wherever you set the threshold, one of the sort of neat things about it is you preserve a measure of equity because it's the folks who would receive the reduction would do so on the highest earning dollars. So, the vast majority of people's sort of benefit wouldn't really change that much if you just did a threshold because there's a relatively small percentage of the people with a benefit of higher, $24,000 right now.
Right now, yeah, but we're not talking about changing anything for already retired people, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And remember that $24,000, which we're talking about right now, is self-adjusted by CPI every year.
In
So
number
that-
two.
Pardon, in number two, yeah, the one that is risk sharing, such that while it may not keep up with the wage growth for those folks, it will cut some of it. It will keep up to some degree with their wage growth. So, what's the full universe of people being impacted by the 24,000? May not be. We don't know. It may be larger than we're thinking. It may well be smaller than we're thinking. We don't know.
And it's also interesting to think about, like, okay, so it's not going to affect the people who have lower pensions right now, but those people also had a lower cost of living, whereas it could affect the next 20 years worth of, say, 15 or 20 years worth of retirees, and then beyond that, not affect again because we've gotten to 80% and everything's ducky. Do you know what I'm saying? So it could negatively affect that group in a way that it wouldn't affect others.
So, like you had your hand up like 10 minutes ago.
Sorry, I'm talking.
That's okay.
Jumped in.
So I guess there's not really a question, it's more of a suggestion or another sort of option or something I threw out there. So, when we went through this process, I was with the state employees last time, we were, one of the things we kept in mind was how do you keep those at the lower end of the pay scale and those at the lower end of the retirement scale whole and not impact them. So we, set up on the contribution amount, we said, if you're in the 25 to 50, I believe, in terms of salary, then you're going to have, let's model out 1.5% increase in contribution amount over 3 years. And then if you're over 75, let's do 2% over 4 years. And so bottom 25 wage earners weren't impacted. And then did a similar thing on the COLA, saying, let's have it be 24,000, I think is what we modeled. And it stays the same if you're under, the first 24,000 is the same. And then above 24,000, there's no COLA. So for the state employees, it was 100% and then no, but this one is set up as 50%. So what I would suggest, is a long way of saying, I would suggest, looking at a similar contribution ask of the actuary where the bottom 25% wage earners don't change their contribution amounts. There's a contribution increase phased in over multiple years for the 25 to 50 or 25 to 75. A little bit higher contribution amount phased in over multiple years for 75 and above. And then a threshold of $24,000 where above that, there's no COLA. The 24,000 is indexed to CPI, so that increases over time. So it's not a stagnant 24,000. And then the other piece, I don't remember if the discussion was we can't go back with anything on revenue side, but if they could also model out on the teacher side, 75 million one-time money, 15 million reoccurring, just because it would be good to marry up one scenario on the revenue side with what was done on the teacher side. Because just, we have 97.5, but we didn't model out something over there that said, I don't believe, like 50 million in one, or maybe we did, but.
We did a similar modeling though for the 75 and 15s a few months ago. So like there's probably some really minor differences in the analysis, but I think we can get a good back of the envelope on that.
This would be good to, so it'd just be good. I mean, this is what I'm suggesting is a very similar sort of ask that we made last time on the teachers, or sorry, on the state, I keep saying that, on the state employee side. So I just would be interested in what that looks like on the teacher side. So then we can look at the bottom line, add them together and just see how far it gets.
Can I ask something to see if I'm understanding it correctly? So I know there was a difference between the VSERS and the VSTERS piece about graduated contributions. And I actually prefer the VSTERS, which is more like the tax structure where everybody gets a certain percentage to 0 to 24,000, and then it's a 6%, 24 to 40 or whatever, wherever we put the numbers. I prefer that to, a sudden change in a year for a person when they go from 69 to 71,000 or something. I guess what I'm saying is at certain thresholds of salary, I could see the contribution raising, but not on the whole salary.
So it's a blended rate. In other words, from 0 to 20, you're paying 5%.
Whether you pay 24 or 124.
And then 20 to 40, you're paying 2%, 40 to 60.
Right.
Income tax.
Yeah, like income tax, exactly.
Yeah, and you all modeled that at the last go around.
Right.
I think the issue with the numbers we got back, not my issue, this is the broad issue, is that I think where the rates and the tiers were drawn doesn't yield a whole lot of
Yeah,
extra money.
exactly. So I would be more interested in tweaking that system than switching to the system that the VSERS did, if you're open to that in your.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, you basically, if you're the 26%, then you're paying, once it's all phased in, you're paying 2% more in contributions than the person in the 24% percentile or whatever.
I'm not sure I followed your example, but I think.
It just jumps up quickly. It doesn't blend between.
Yeah,
$1 difference in your salary can really, you can end up with a very small change in your salary, leaving with quite a less in your envelope. So
do you remember what the numbers were, those salary bands that had the different percentages? Because I like Molly's idea.
Yeah, Molly's point, we should go back in there and say that the state employee should run a similar one,
Although it's on live stream, so,
Well, I just think it should be this, I think we should have something that's, similar, so we can look and say.
I do like similar. But it's just me.
Yeah,
You
I think
like what?
part of the difference too, though, is thinking about how the state employees are more under one type of contract set up in their jobs, whereas with the teachers, since we all have contracts based on our districts, the salary disparity is different for jobs, years of experience, education. So I think that's where we're trying to keep that more in mind too. I think Eric and I maybe had a discussion about their approach versus our approach, and that was part of the thinking.
Let's come up with Chris.
So if you take a look at my slides, page 21 from today, the threshold that were studied was 5.5 on the first 40,000 of income, 6.25 on income 40 to 60, 7 on income 60 to 80, 7.75 on income above 80. And then I did some quick math about, okay, if I'm a person who's earning, 50, 60, 75, 100, what am I effectively paying in these contribution rates as a percentage of my total salary? And, you can see here that the reason why this doesn't yield a whole lot is, it's a pretty small increased rate on a relatively small cohort of the membership. Because, if you're making 75,000 is the 6% break even under this. So, you could be a more recently hired person who's currently paying 6, who might be making much less than 75, and you would actually see your contributions go down.
Right.
So the way to make this yield more money is that either the brackets, the income brackets need to be adjusted, or the marginal rates on the higher earners need to be increased. So I know the treasurer analyzed something back in January where they looked at rates similarly tiered. And I think they had like a 10% rate on the highest income bracket, and that yielded a greater amount of savings, but. Sir, yes.
So just thinking about contributions and the bands, a possibility to run would be 7.75% on income between 80,000 and 100,000. And 100,000 and beyond would be 8.5%.
You're not going to capture very much extra money doing that.
This year, but
Yeah,
you know,
there's
5
just not
years.
that, there's just not that many earners in the system that are, it's a pretty small percentage.
But don't you think that 5 years from now, that percentage will be a lot higher?
I have no idea what was in 5 years from now.
Well, we have
But all
expected,
business is predicated on these assumptions.
The expected
You're
salary,
having a
right?
the expected salary growth they use is 3% for teachers.
So, it's a little more complicated than that. So it's the overall aggregate payroll of everybody is assumed to grow at 3%. But the individual employees are presumed to have different rates of salary increase based on what age they are. So typically, and I don't have the experience sitting in front of me, but typically people who are earlier in their careers are more likely to see larger year-over-year increases. So they average, it's two different things. The overall payroll growth number is one thing. Then when you look at the actual employees, that's a different thing.
Because of the steps.
Exactly.
I have a suggestion here, and it's kind of based off of, loosely off of what you just said. One of the things that I liked, and I'm on slide 21, option 2, leave the 40,000 band and the 40 to 60,000 band alone. Those are folks that are in all probability got a family at home, trying to feed kids, which is, if you've got my kid who still is 30, I still, it's unfathomable what he can eat. He weighs 150 pounds soaking wet. His idea of fun is climbing Killington, so there you go. And instead of the 7, you bump it up a half. And instead of the 7.75, you bump it up a half. And then you add 1% to the above $100,000.
Wait, can you say what the numbers would be after?
So sure, so it would be 5.5,
Yeah.
6.25,
Yeah,
7.5, 8.25, and then 9.25 for over $100,000.
Can I ask, are there some teachers paying 5% and some paying 6%?
Yes.
Yeah, it's on your data fire.
So should we have two different?
I think we should work, personally, I feel like we should work on a way toward equity with that. Because right now, in general, the younger, lower paid teachers are paying a higher percentage. And we've been striving to move toward a more progressive system. So if there are ways that we can build, more equity into it,
And is
as
that,
we make these changes, that would be good.
is that why the bottom one was 5.5 and sort of in between?
Yeah, because a lot of those people now are paying 6. When we ran what these numbers would look like, some of the people at the lower end of our pay scales did see a gain on the backs of people on the higher ends.
Right.
Because people, kind of what you were saying, although the assumptions are dangerous because, I'm up toward the top, but I still have a 16-year-old at home and I've got one in college. I got 5 years of college to pay for. Like, we can't really make assumptions about how people's lives
Right.
play out.
You cannot. But I do feel that if we can not encumber the lower paid
Yes.
as much as encumber the upper paid, who can probably handle it a little easier.
Exactly. As a general rule, that's the thought of our group as well in terms of that progressive tax structure. Just being cognizant and mindful of assumptions and not thinking that they're 100%.
So Peter, just to clarify, your thinking was the first two sets, 5.5 and 6.25, they stay the same.
Correct.
So that income 60 to 80,000 goes to 7.5.
Correct.
Then income from 80,000 to 100,000 goes to 8.25.
Correct,
100,000 and above goes to 9.25.
correct.
So just some quick back of the envelope math that may be riddled with errors. Under these two numbers, somebody making obviously 50 or 60 wouldn't see changes to that. Somebody making 80, just as for the sake of argument, their effective rate would be 6.19. Somebody making 100, their effective rate would be 6.6.
So for some people, that's a 1.2% jump and a 1.6.
Can you say that again, please?
80,000 would be an effective rate of 6.19. I
Okay,
didn't do it at 75. I could do that.
'Cause even though there's two different,
that's fine.
even though there's two different rates, most teachers are paying the 5%, so the 6% is for new hires.
We actually don't have the exact number though, of what that split is. I believe when we were in our small groups last time, the lady who was working with us said it's about a 50-50 split on the 5%, 6%. And I
Molly
think
does a handful
The
of.
treasurer's office is currently trying to find this answer.
No, that sounds awfully right, because I think the one actuarial report was the sort of blended across all employees contribution rate is about 5.5% or so. And over time, it is expected to get closer to 6 as employees attrition.
when did that rate change go in 14?
So, yeah, I think something like that.
I mean, I guess it's hard.
Yeah,
We
that's
could
100%.
do a rough calculation if you look at the valuation. And
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, there it is right there, in 2014.
in 2014.
So Mike, so again, keeping in mind that the numbers that we just had, would you go back through what you're putting on the
Yeah.
table? Or what you think you're gonna have the
Yeah.
actuaries model for us, please?
So on the top, off the top on the revenue side, it's 75 million.
Okay.
Just to do 50-50 for the two, if that was a scenario.
Yeah.
15 million reoccurring, and that would just marries up with one of the other scenarios run with for this previously. So then on contributions, it would be what we just described, the sort of progressive, flat progressive, or replace the flat with the progressive rate.
Okay.
5.5, 6.25, 7.5, 8.25, and then 9.25. So it's right.
So they're over 100,000, adding a new bracket for that.
And then discussing the COLA, leaving it the same for under 24,000. So 24,000, 50% CPI, over 24,000, no COLA, and the 24,000 is adjusted annually by CPI, so that 24,000 isn't stagnant, it goes up. And that COLA piece is similar to one of the scenarios we ran for teachers as well, where we took the 24,000 and just said the threshold before, stays the same for those under, goes away for those at the top, just to see what that impact is. I think that's an area, I think that's an area where you see a lot of movement in the numbers when you start, making different changes to the COLA.
One thing that might also, I'm just throwing this out there for thought, is this sort of conversation on indexing that 24,000 or whatever the threshold is. It might be worth thinking about whether instead of indexing it to the CPI, you would like to index it to a static rate annually. So, say, that 24,000 is going to go up by 2%.
Yeah, it's gonna be easier for the actuary too.
Yeah, the reason why I mentioned that instead of CPI is if we're talking about trying to shed some risk from the system, it's a lot more predictable for them to model and understand that, the CPI might be 5% next year, but if we're just assuming that 24 is going to increase by 2% a year, that's easy for them to model. It probably takes some uncertainty out of the equation, and it might help shed some risk and still kind of get to where you want to get.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good idea.
It's taking a variable out of the equation.
So correct me if I'm wrong, the two retirement boards, the recommendations that they make to the actuaries is base it off of 2.4%.
So the CPI is assumed to, the CPI is assumed to grow, I think, at 2.3. The COLA assumption, which is derived from the CPI assumption, but also factors in, the 1% minimum, 5% max stuff, is very close to that, but slightly different. So they assume CPI will be 2.3. If you're at 100% of CPI COLA, they assume the COLA will be 2.4. So they're pretty close, but, you know, whenever the CPI is surging like it is right now, you know, obviously the experience is much higher than what we're assuming it's gonna be. And if you have got a 50% COLA and you're assuming it's gonna be less, the same factors come into play. My whole point is, the more uncertainty we can take out of this, the less risk of unfunded liabilities ballooning again in the future there is.
Right.
Well, then what I would like to do here, this is me, is take his suggestion and add a fourth suggestion that incorporates 24% that the retirement boards recommended to the actuaries. And use that as a separate recommendation based off of what he did. And instead of the 50% CPI, it's 50% of the I don't know what you call
So I think we might be talking about a couple different things.
it. Yeah, we might be.
I'd like to get us back to a conversation where the CPI, where it's back to 100%.
Okay.
I think as Molly continues to say, us receiving 50% in retirement is already risk sharing. So if we're going to look at something that, you know, has both that give and take approach to it, I think boosting that to 100% and then tying it to the funded ratio makes a lot of sense. For something that our membership would buy into.
And I think, and I was going to, thank you for saying that, because I thought it, and it left my mind. That concept, once it reaches 80%, it goes back to the concept of, that I've been saying, whatever the pensions ought to look like in the future, it would then get reset to that. I agree with you. In other words, we get to a point, and as long as we're not changing the pensions such that the hole starts getting deeper again, then we change the pensions back to something that is a little more similar to what we had 3 years ago.
Except that for us, you know, it was 50%, which is not.
Yeah, and I would like to, I agree.
Yes,
That would need to go away as well as part of that the full CPI would be the full CPI. Chris, why are you doing that?
I'm just thinking.
Okay.
I'm also very.
I tend to call on people and not wait until they put their hand up, sorry.
Peter, were you, just to clarify, you and Kate, you were saying go to 100% when we're at like 80 or 85 or some threshold in the future. But were you saying do it on, as a scenario, do 100% now?
Yes.
And then try to figure out how to offset that in some other way?
Yes.
And you had a scenario where it was 100%, right?
I do.
These first two scenarios today were.
Yeah, the first scenario was 100%, but it's a COLA without an adjustment, and wait 36 months.
Right.
So.
Just thinking time-wise, Chris, have you been capturing the scenarios, ideas that have been put out there, and can we get a run-through of that?
So I've been capturing some of them, but I think we need to just have some
I've got
decisions made about what you actually want to do. So, yeah, and just to go back, we did the cost out 100% of CPI just on the first 20,000 of pension income, and then keeping it at 50% on 20 to 40, and then 25% on CPI above 40, adds over $5 million to the ADAC and 34.7 to the unfunded liability. It is not an insignificant actuarial loss.
Which one? Which was that?
Increasing the CPI to 100%, or the COLA to 100% of CPI, even on a small subset of the benefit on the first 20,000
Yeah,
is it is an actuarial loss.
yeah, because so many people are below 24 right now.
Exactly, and you're enhancing that benefit on everybody who has, no matter what you know, if you've got 100,000, I know nobody has 100,000 on pension, but if they did, you know, they'd be getting that benefit on the first 20,000.
And combining that with a 36-month wait won't bring it down to.
We did not cost out a 36-month wait, but that could wash some of that out.
I'm just saying, if we
We're
can
still at kind of
make
zero.
that happen, and then we change the contribution rates to something substantially higher, like what we're talking about in the other one, it has that give and take effect.
So I
Sell the membership.
I think we ought to cost it out. I think we ought to cost it out and take that, my first idea with a full CPI COLA. Sometimes I think we conflate the two.
I think your second idea, the 100% COLA on the first 24,000 adjusted
CPI.
with either a 24-month wait or a 36-month wait. And then go to when it's 80% funded, we flip to something else that somebody decides.
No worse than what we currently have.
So one of the things that the actuary did, Chris, was they costed out pieces and then they put together combos. I would assume they could still do that here.
We would want them to do that here.
Okay,
Because this is an area where you have more than one change, they're gonna interact with one another, so you don't, it's not gonna be additive.
so if we did if the ideas that are on the table right now, bringing the COLA back to 100% or leaving it at 50% until we reach 80%, until we reach 80% funded. Leaving it at 100%, and that's not going to change. Or leaving it at 50% until we reach 80% funded. COLA at $24,000. That amount is eligible for COLA. Above that is not. COLA at $24,000, adjustable to this, adjusted for CPI on an annual basis. And then anything above that is not.
Yeah, or you can either do it for CPI or maybe peg it as a static rate that's similar to what the inflationary, what the assumption is, you know, just.
Okay, so let's.
Something to think about. Is this a relatively painless way to try to shed some risk?
Sure. So, you can include that. Wait 24 months, wait 36 months. And what else have we talked about? And then the increased contributions of 5.5, 6.25, 7.5, 8.25, and 9.25 income banded. Was there anything else that was, and then of course we want to find out about the 75-15 money concept. Was there anything else that was on the table, or did I kind of guess?
We haven't talked about it yet, but I would love to get back to that idea about the longevity incentive tied to the freeze option and how we can maybe shake that out to make that work. Where in order to receive the longevity bonus, you have to opt into freezing your benefit. Because then with that longevity bonus, it is giving people some of that money up front right there. And that might encourage people then to stay longer, because the problem with getting people to freeze is that Siegel didn't think that people would elect into that. However, if we tie those things together, does that mean?
If you tie longevity bonus into it, and I'm the one that put the longevity bonus on I'm not wedded to it, but I felt it was worth looking at. And I think that we ought to continue to look at it and look at it on your side as well.
And not that the actuaries would do this, but my consideration of the funding would be when there's a surplus in the ed fund, which I know we have a surplus there, instead of it being tied to that, 150 million.
Okay, so you'd prefer to have it come out of the ed fund surplus?
Yeah.
That's valid. That's valid. Chris, what do we need to do here what else do you need to work that piece?
So what, on the ed fund or on that? So, yeah, I think the actuaries, if we're going to ask them to study anything, I think we're going to need to give them some behavioral assumptions to maybe work in and be like, you know what, if we encourage.
What we did with the state employees was 50% would retire. And then it was what, 10, 10, 10, 5, and everyone's gone or something.
And there was like a 5-year like cap on it.
5-year run.
Yeah, so I think we would need to give them some assumptions like that to model, and see what they come back with. But yeah, their blind spot is what's the carrot?
Sure.
And if the carrot isn't coming out of pension assets, like it's not part of the model, and it can't be. So like it would have to come from somewhere else.
Yep.
That's a whole separate question from like, what is the right?
Right.
What carrot is the best to get the result you want,
Yeah. And I think they modeled 50% uptake, 100% uptake, right?
They did. We can ask them to replicate that, what they did in Group C, and just say, you know what, if this kind of bonus is tied to a freeze, like what can you come back with?
Let's replicate the same percentage to uptake.
The only thing I was gonna say, I mean, it's great to see those numbers, but I would almost think 25%, 75% would be more helpful, because we're not gonna get 100%. So
You're not gonna get it. Something always happens, and someone's gonna.
I just think the number is gonna be more between 25%, 35%. It's gonna be in that range, I think.
Yeah, I would think so.
And do you have enough for that part, Chris?
I think so. If you all are comfortable with us using those sort of assumptions where, the same assumptions that were used in that first memo there that, I don't have a feel for what your all's experience is like. Do you think these are realistic assumptions? Do you think do you think that if something like this is offered, that these are the kind of uptick rates that we would expect? Like, I just don't know. So I think whatever we all feel is more realistic to give them.
And what just to be clear, what we're talking about is, if it were me and I was of retirement age, I would get some sort of bonus. We don't know what that would be yet.
We haven't yet defined the amount. I've got a dollar amount.
So I guess that's partly would determine whether or not, and they're freezing, so they're not accruing, towards their top 3 years or whatever, and they're not paying into the system.
Correct.
Okay.
You're correct.
So then, I guess I think you'd have to define how much you're talking about, right?
My initial thought off the top of my head, and I really wasn't prepared to share it, but why not? It was $100 a paycheck, more, and as a bonus after.
And I was thinking 2,000. So if we have 26 paychecks, that's 2,600. We're sort of in the same ballpark, and I would think that would make a difference. I tend to agree with Andrew that people would take that option.
I think you need to see it in the paycheck to say, yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah.
And $100 to me would do that.
Money in the hand.
Yep.
Or one time up front, I think gets people moving.
Yep.
And just thinking, I do think people would take this because I think we've seen people electing not to work quite as long and thinking about everything we're going through right now with COVID in schools. And in the state of Vermont specifically, the teachers, we're having to deal with healthcare bargaining. Regardless of the outcome from arbitration here in the next week, we're going to be paying more no matter what side the arbitrators select. So our costs are going up, and
We have people getting ready to retire right now. We need to sweeten the pot, and that's one way to do it. And they will also help the system on the back end, like.
That's right. Well,
And the ed surplus is there, like this is the time. If there was ever a time, it's to keep people in right now, because they're already counting the days.
and we
This
just
is a real
don't have
hard
enough
year. Last year was a
places.
really hard year. It's not getting easier.
We're not pulling more people to Vermont, at least not easily.
and
So yeah, we need to keep people in their position. Maybe we ought to cost out 25, 50, 75. It's not gonna be 100,
right.
so why bother?
Right.
Maybe we do 25, 50, 75, and then if we're thinking 37.5%, that's an easy number to come up with ourselves.
So what we can do is we can ask them to basically replicate the analysis they did for the SERS, but for the teachers with those parameters and couple it with a freeze option, see what they can come back with.
Yes, and then we need to get next door if we want to get out of here.
One clarifying.
Only-
Okay, Mom.
No.
Just one clarifying question on that is, there was one scenario where it was frozen and people didn't pay anything in, and they didn't, something else didn't happen. But there was another scenario where it was an incentive to keep working, and they kept paying their contribution amount, and their average final compensation kept going up. It's just they were capped at the 50%. And I heard us say, we're not going to do the contribution, and we're going to freeze their amount. So just wanted to make sure which direction we were.
Yeah, I think we're thinking about sort of a hybrid of the two. So the freeze, but not just a freeze offered in isolation, but say, you know what, it would be coupled with a longevity incentive, similar, and we would expect similar behavior to what they modeled in the SERS with, it'd be up to 5 years, and you'd have, X% would just do what they're going to do anyway, but X% would, I think it was like 10% would stay for an extra year, 10 for year 2, 10 for year 3, or something like that. We can have them model that out and then do like a 25, 50, 75% scenario, so we see what the range of possibilities are.
So I was saying 25, 50, 75 would take it and would accept the longevity freeze and accept.
Right.
That would make sure. So
We're
the,
saying the same thing.
Okay, just want to make sure.
so the incentive would be, I'm not gonna pay contributions anymore.
Correct.
And I'm getting this $2,000,
Correct.
$1,000 bonus.
Correct.
And is it a one-time thing or is it?
No, no, as long as you stay on, and I said cap it at 5 years, I think that's, again, it's a number out of thin air, but,
Or I guess a better way of saying that is, do we offer it once? Like, would we offer it in a year for everybody?
Gotcha. I think that we need to, I would like to get a trend line out of it. And if we get a trend line, you really need 3 years. So I think we need to run this for 3 years just to see what our experience is. And then we can adjust after that.
It was happening during COVID. A lot of people might not elect to take it.
That's the problem.
Yeah, it's true too.
We got what we got.
One of the things I was wondering about, on the option 4 that we ran last time, increasing the AFC by 1%, we saw that actually was a loss to the system. And part of that seems like because we didn't give parameters around that.
That's
Also-
what's driving the numbers, is we didn't give them any behavioral change assumptions.
But also the 3.6% that they used for people at the top of the pay scale is not usually that high at the top of the.
That's for a different, that's for a different thing, though, I think. That's for the freeze analysis that they looked at that, when they were doing the present value. This is the max benefit by 1% of AOC for each year you work beyond. The reason why that resulted in an actuarial gain for Group C, and all us here is because Group C gave the actuaries behavior, like, what do we expect? How many more people are gonna stay for an extra year, for another 2? So like, they were able to change the behavioral assumptions. If we're not giving them assumption changes, their model just processes this as an enhancement of the benefits that for the people who
Right.
are already assumed to be working.
Because there's already like 800 people beyond. I think we'd mentioned this.
Exactly.
Yeah, gotcha. So it's just those 800 people are getting more than they get.
Exactly. That's how the model processes.
I feel like the incentive that we're talking about in the freeze will get to the, what we were trying to get to with the 1%.
I think you're right.
So they don't need to run.
I don't,
I
well,
don't think so. I'm also cognizant of how much we're asking them to do. Yeah. And, you know, we've got a lot right here, but I think it's good stuff. And,
I'm gonna wanna make sure we go through this one more time before.
Yep.
We try to have
go ahead.
75 million one time, 15 million recurring.
Yep.
Longevity plus freeze, use the VSERS group F analysis with 25, 50, 75% participation assumptions.
Okay.
I have the progressive contribution rates that go 5.5 for first 40, 6.25, 40 to 60, 7.5, 60 to 80, 8.25, 80 to 100, 9.25 over 100.
Yep.
Then there was a lot of discussion about what to do around the COLA, and I want to make sure we all have agreement on what you want to study on. So it would be helpful if we could just repeat that conversation to make sure that we're all very clear with what we want to look at.
Okay. So in this regard, I'd like the COLA run 2 ways. One with the COLA with the current, the 24,000 with the current 50% of, is it CPI or is it 50% of CPI? And then a COLA 24,000 to 100% of the same number.
both of those with the inflator.
Both of those, yes, both of those with the inflator.
And something to do with the 80% funded trigger?
Yes, yes. Yeah, because it is a risk sharing. And so the 80% trigger, and again, we really cannot define what future will look like, but yes.
Okay, is this a third, or are we adding this to the first 2 we just talked about?
So that was the third.
Okay, so COLA, we won't do it twice. So we'll do, the way I have this, one run where you just cap it at 24,000 of the current 50% CPI.
Correct. In other words, the first thing I put on the table really, you know, it just changed 2 things. One was a COLA 24,000 cap. Above that, it's not COLA and hasn't changed anything else. And wait 36 months.
So now I'm confused. What all do you want to study as a group? Are we doing the 24,000 with the 50% CPI with the delay, with an inflator or without an inflator?
Why don't we do this? Let's take my first idea off the table. Let's take that first thing off the table. Let's just do 2.
Both with the inflator,
Both
one with the
with the inflator,
50%,
both
one
with
with
the
the
inflator.
100%,
Yep,
both with the 24, and both with the 80% trigger.
Yep.
Is the 80% trigger an actuarial, or it's just we know that what we suggest is when we get to 80%, those go back to.
They can make an assumption based on when we're likely to hit 80%.
Right.
And obviously we're working with assumptions here.
And the only other thing that I want to insert in this is that one waits the current 12 months prior to getting a COLA, the other one waits 24 months prior to getting a COLA.
You don't want to do a 36?
No.
We have a 12-month.
You have 12,
Right, you have
you have 12 now.
Yeah, okay, that's right.
So we'll do
24
and 36?
Yeah, do 24 and 36.
So we have, can I just restate, see if I got it?
Please, dear God, you know, thinking out loud.
The
always
COLA
needed.
scenarios, as I understand them, are 24,000 adjustable both, one at 50% and one at 100% of CPI. And then also one of those at 24-month wait time and one at 36-month wait time. And these individual pieces we'll be able to look at as well as the combined? Okay.
And the $24,000, when we say 24,000 adjustable, are we assuming that beginning in FY '24, that 24,000 would increase by CPI or some other factor? Okay.
Peter, thanks for starting us off with something to chew on, like with, that was really helpful to.
I just-
Very helpful.
I hate walking in cold, I really, personally, you know, and I'm always the first person to offer something, so I figured I'd better have something to offer.
I'm sorry it intervened with your lunch, but I'm glad that you had it to offer.
Trust me, my lunch would have been the same anyway. I mean, Mike will tell you, you know, it's the military, and it's why take 10 minutes when you can eat it in 2?
And I'll taste it later. True. Logistical, just for this group, when you talk these numbers that are really complicated and you're trying to put them out, because of the Zoom,
God, yeah, what's it saying?
not captioning thing, just slow, it's capturing them when you go slow.
Okay,
When you talk really fast, and then other people chime in with numbers, it creates chaos. So, what you watch later, but when you go over there, I'm just giving you a heads up, okay, suggestion. When you get to the numbers, just slow yourself down a little bit, and they'll capture them all.
All right, so because I want to make sure that the person who is going to be communicating with the actuaries has this straight, I'm going to actually ask Chris to present our. And then we can murder board in. You can take us offline.
Let me just real quick, make sure I got all the bullets right before I start talking to other people outside this room. $24,000 adjustable by the CPI beginning in FY '24, forward from there. We'll have two different versions of this. One run under the status quo, 50% of CPI. One run under 100% of CPI. Then we can layer in to those analyses what happens by delaying the COLA 24 and 36 months. And I think we can ask them to run them both, and it's not going to add thousands of dollars of time to the analysis. Did I capture your intent?
Yes, along with the 75-15, one time.
All that stuff.
And then the income bands with the increased contributions on the top 3 income bands.
Yep. And Chris, I think the only part was just that tied to that 80%.
Yes.
Yeah, so what do you want to happen when it hits 80%? I want to make sure I'm clear on that.
So at 80%, something along the lines of the two sides will get together to determine what the current environment would allow for going forward. It doesn't work. The two sides would work together to reduce the constrictions that this overlays on the pension in a manner that will not harm the pension funded.
So I'm not going to be able to get the actuaries to study that.
No, you won't. That's nothing more than us saying that at 80%, we're going to.
Take another look.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it could be a total, you guys can make like a policy recommendation that's like, we recommend that this measure is put in place until the fund hits that and put all kinds of caveats around it.
Thank you.
That's what I think we don't, on the one hand, we could not even include it in actual analysis.
Right.
On the other hand, we could say the 50% scenario becomes 50% for everybody. at 80%, right? Or the 100% scenario becomes 100% for everybody at the 80%, and that is something maybe they could look at.
They could look at that, but that's a separate question then.
And I almost think that what we're asking them to do and how much time we have, that can be dealt with later if we like the concept of it going away at a certain point, which I do like that concept.
That could just go into the final report as being a recommendation. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be. Because we don't even know what it would happen at 80%, but we
Yeah.
have an understanding that that's what risk sharing is.
That's right.
If things get good, you
Right.
renegotiate the terms.
Absolutely correct.
I think I've got it, but what my plan is after we report or whatever, I'm gonna type this up in something resembling plain English, hopefully, and circulate it on this to make sure I have it right.